Alrighty, so now that we have all of the careers, I can finally make a tier list that's evergreen. Assuming there are no big balance changes in the future, this will be my first and final tier list for Cataclysm Quickplay. Now, before we start ranking the classes, we need some context to the tier list. First, this is Cataclysm Quickplay, the important part being that it's Quickplay. This is the way I almost always play the game, so it's what I'm most familiar with. Now, that means that this tier list would look very different if it was a group play tier list or a solo tier list. I'll try to point that out where it applies. But right, there are certain classes that are just going to do better in a group play scenario rather than quick play, where you're not able to rely on your teammates as much and things are not as coordinated. Now, this is all in context of vanilla Cataclysm, but applies to the lower difficulties with a few exceptions. For example, Bounty Hunter may be ranked higher in Champion because of how easily he deletes bosses there. But of course, things are different in Cataclysm. Now, for the rankings, they are based on 5 characteristics. They are, in no particular order, damage, obviously, tankiness, which is crowd control and survivability, versatility, clutchability, which is your ability to save the game from ending, being able to pick up teammates, stuff like that. And lastly, support, which is giving your team buffs, debuffs, etc. And those are all valued equally. So now that we've got some context, let's get this thing started. This is my first and final tier list for Cataclysm Quickplay. And first we have the Ironbreaker, which is actually a pretty good starting point to describe what a powerful character actually is. We all know Ironbreaker is like the tankiest class in the game. If he takes the right level 30 talent, he can actually provide damage to his team, and his ult being a taunt actually adds value as well. Then his damage with the Troll Hammer Torpedo and the dual hammers can get kinda crazy, but he has enough damage where he actually competes with the DPS careers, and because of his sheer tankiness, he's able to clutch fairly well as well. So surprise, surprise, Ironbreaker is in the S tier. Bounty Hunter is one of those classes that is either overrated or underrated depending on who you're talking to. And part of this is because it depends highly on how good you are with the Bounty Hunter. If you're really good at special sniping and you're really good at hitting headshots with the ult, then I would say then Bounty Hunter is a really solid option. His crit passive allows him to one-shot every special, like every 6 seconds or something like that. The problem that he doesn't provide much support to the team in terms of buffs or anything like that. And if you're not as skilled of a bounty hunter, then you're not going to do as much boss damage. You're not going to be able to take specials out as easily. And remember, we're going with average skill, which for me will land bounty hunter in the B tier. If it's a good bounty hunter, he's probably up here. If you're a bad bounty hunter, you're probably down here, but we split the difference and put him in B. Now, unfortunately, the Huntsman doesn't provide a whole lot to your team. He has an aura that gives you 5% crit chance, which is good in the right team comps, but the problem is, why would you pick Huntsman over Mercenary, over Grail Knight, over Foot Knight, especially when there are other ranged classes that are better than him at what he does? Now, in the right hands, the Huntsman can do some pretty good boss damage and is pretty good at special sniping, but he pretty much has a worse Ranger Veteran ult, right? And for those reasons, I think Huntsman is one of the C tier classes. The Grail Knight is one of the classes that scores really high in almost all the categories except for one, right? In that he's not very versatile, and that's mostly because he doesn't have access to a ranged weapon. He can't help with sniping specials, but he has some of the best damage in the game. He has a viable meta build where you can take the shield, which gives him good crowd control. His blessings provide more stats to your team than he has any right to, since he has so much damage, and because he's so good at killing things, he has a pretty okay ability to clutch games. So Grail Knight is an easy S tier. Now, the Unchained is a medium risk, medium reward class. If you don't know what I'm talking about, the more overcharge she has, the more attack speed damage she'll have. And her blood magic passive gives her a lot of tankiness as long as you're holding onto your ult. And she has pretty good damage. Again, she's no Grail Knight, but she has really good damage. You take the Flaming Flail, that's going to give you a decent amount of crowd control. She can kind of help out with sniping specials, it just kind of depends. And her tankiness does allow her some clutch ability. And she does have a level 30 talent that can provide temp HP to your teammates, but it's not really usable at will since you want to save your ult to save you from dying from overcharge, and the amount of temp HP really isn't that much. And kind of just medium on versatility, and for that's what's keeping her out of S tier, but I think Unchained sits in the A tier. And the Zealot is an interesting one, right? He's one of the classes that I would put lower on the list if you're playing in a group, but higher on the list for quick play. And that's because he doesn't really provide anything to the team other than a bunch of damage and never dying. but because of his damage and survivability and his ability to help out sniping specials, it makes him really good in quick play. You really don't have to rely on your team at all as a Zealot. So I think he belongs in the A tier. Again, in group play, I would probably put him in B tier, but since we're on quick play, I'd put him in A. And yes, the Foot Knight. I made a video on the Foot Knight, and it's probably the video I'm most proud of, because I've actually seen people recognizing how good the Foot Knight is in quick play after I made that video. Whether or not it's because of the video, you know, who knows, but Foot Knight is my favorite class to play. I think he's absolutely incredible in quick play. I would maybe put him a little bit lower on the tier list in group play, because his real weakness is damage. If you're running the stagger build with the shield and mace, then you are going to have incredible clutch ability, incredible crowd control, pretty good support, okay versatility, and not very great damage. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not like he doesn't do any damage. The push attack light combo does a good amount of damage to armored enemies, and spamming the shield bash is going to do a fair amount of damage while keeping the horde at bay, but he can't really contend with damage classes like the Ironbreaker. However, I think his ability to clutch and his crowd control make up for that double over. And I might be a little biased, but you know what? I think Foot Knight is S tier. Now for the Outcast Engineer, I really want him to be good. In the hands of some players, he is really good. Some of the best players I've played with are really good Outcast Engineers and make him look like one of the best classes in the game. However, most Outcast Engineers I see don't fare well in Cataclysm. He provides very little to the team. He has an okay aura. It doesn't help anybody hit breakpoints that I know of. And honestly, if you're gonna pick someone to help hit breakpoints, just pick the Witch Hunter Captain. He is kind of versatile in that he's mostly a ranged class, but with Barden's weapons, he is pretty good in melee. Not as good as any of these classes in A tier or above right now, but his real downfall is that he kind of needs his team to peel for him. And in quick play, that probably isn't going to happen, probably. And shooting a horde with the minigun is going to rob your team from temp HP, and for the melee only classes, it's going to rob them from really playing the game. So it hurts, it really does, but Outcast Engineer for me is in D tier. Now, Mercenary is one of the most well-balanced class in the game. He's very well-rounded, right? His damage is good enough, right? Like he's not going to contend with the Grail Knight, but he's very versatile, offers a lot of support to his team with all of his potential buffs he could take, and the temp HP from his ult, and his clutch ability is very mid. And that's the thing with Mercenary, is that nothing is over the top. If he had just a little bit more damage or just a little bit more crowd control, then he would probably be an S tier, but I think in quick play he is an A tier. If this was group play, he would probably take Foot Knight's spot in S tier, but again, we're on quick play. Now Shade is one of the hardest classes for me to place, because Shade is a highly skill expressive character. It is not easy to get behind enemies in this game without dying. You have to be very good at dodging and be very aware of your positioning. So her damage is good, and on a good player is really good. She doesn't offer too much to the team in terms of support. She has relatively no crowd control and is fairly versatile. Since we're going off an average skilled player, I'm going to put her in B tier with Bounty Hunter. Similarly, I think a high skill Shade player is an A, and then a low skill is in C. Pyromancer is another one that is hard for me to place, and this is mostly because I haven't played her as much. She provides an aura similar to Outcast Engineer, has good damage if she gets the good RNG, but to get any crowd control on the Pyromancer, you would have to take the Fire Sword, and her lack of any mobility or damage to make up for her lack in the other categories makes me think she sits in C tier. I'm willing to change this one based on your guys' opinions. This is really the only class in the game I haven't played that much. The Pyromancers I see in quick play are very polarized. They're either godly, killing everything in sight, or awful and going down every 10 steps. She's hard for me to place, but my intuition tells me that she is not as good as Shade or Bounty Hunter. Ranger Veteran is another one that changes based on quick play or group play, and that's because he has probably some of the best support in the game. He can give your team ammo, he can give your team potions, he can give your team temp HP, he can give your team attack speed with Ale. With the Masterwork pistol, he has excellent boss damage. He is one of the best support classes in the game, but I think a lot of his power comes from playing with premeditated team comps, because he has a bunch of different builds he can go based on what his team is running, and that is really the only thing that keeps him out of S tier in quick play. So I think in quick play he is an A tier, but in group play, he's an easy S tier. Now, Witch Hunter Captain, I made a video on him not too long ago saying he was the best class in the game. He is also one of the most versatile classes in the game. His damage is really good and scales with your difficulty because of his crit headshot kills. He has some of the best support in the game by flat out just increasing your team's damage to tagged targets, and he can give your team crit chance. The only part where he falters a little bit is with his clutch ability, and it's really just a little bit. So of course, Witch Hunter Captain is S tier. Handmaiden is another class that has really good support. She's another one of the most versatile, and she has good clutch ability, not as good as the Foot Knight, but up there with some of the best in the game. But she lacks a bit in damage. She does lack a bit in damage, and her crowd control is just okay. So the question is her supports, clutch ability, and versatility good enough to circumvent the fact that she lacks a bit in damage and crowd control? I think that answer for the most part is yes, but I am always going back and forth whether or not she is A tier or S tier because of that question. But I'm feeling generous, so I think she belongs in the S tier. And really, I think she's at the bottom of S tier or at the top of A tier. It could really go either way. Sister of the Thorn is another one of those classes where her rank depends on whether you're playing in quick play or group play. She has very good support and utility, especially if she takes the Deepwood Staff. How good her crowd control depends entirely on which ult you're using and how good you are at using it. Her damage is okay. I've found that the other elf classes have much better damage. That being said, she does amplify the damage of your team, so those points go into support, and she is fairly versatile. So in other words, she's very strong at support, but isn't the greatest at the other things. If this were group play, I would put her in A tier, but for quick play, I think she's B. If you've been playing this game for any amount of time, it should be no surprise to you that Battle Wizard is one of the best classes in the game. She has some of the best damage. Her ult gives her really good clutch ability and crowd control. If you take the Fire Sword on her, she has even more crowd control. She has several different builds she can go. She can take the Bolt Staff and be a special sniper or elite killer. She can take the Corsation Staff and just kill everything, or just melt bosses with the Beam Staff. So she is very versatile. And the only part where she lacks is support. So easily, Battle Wizard is an S tier. Now, Waystalker is a fairly balanced class. She has good damage, very good versatility, and that she is good in melee and also one of the best special snipers in the game. She has a little bit of support and not very much crowd control at all. And she is not the best at clutching, but I think her versatility and damage make up for that. So, along as the Waystalker is not shooting javelins into your back, she's A tier. Slayer is another one of my favorite classes in the game. One of the things that got me hooked in this game was witnessing a half-naked dwarf leap into a horde and just murder everything. But the thing is, the Slayer offers almost nothing in terms of support. His crowd control isn't great. He's not very versatile because he has no ranged weapon, but he is very, very good at killing things. And he has pretty good clutch ability. If you haven't figured it out yet, if your class has any kind of dash or leap or anything like that, then you have pretty good clutch ability because you can do the revive ult tech where you ult away as you're reviving. And I would argue that Slayer is so good at killing things and so good at keeping the run going that he's A tier. I might be a little biased, okay? And Warrior Priest should not be any surprise to you. He has some of the best support in the game, very good crowd control between his ult and the flail and shield, great damage, not so great versatility, and pretty dang good clutch ability. So it shouldn't be surprised that Warrior Priest is in S tier. And lastly, we have the Necromancer. This one is a bit hard to place because how recently it came out, but I'm pretty confident about where she sits. Her damage is fantastic. She has a lot of crowd control with the flaming flail and the skeletons, and has just enough survivability to not be squishy. Now, she's really good in melee and does have the option to drop back and help with special sniping, which makes her versatility good but nothing amazing. And she offers almost nothing in terms of buffs or debuffs to help her team. Now, I do think her damage and crowd control make up for her lack of support. Enough to put her in A tier, but not enough to put her in S tier. Now, you might be thinking to yourself,
but Michael, S tier can have the most classes out of all the tiers.
Well, here's the thing. The game is actually fairly balanced. All of the classes do just fine in Cataclysm. It really depends more on player skill. You may see Outcast engineers in Quickplay completely just solo the map. You may see Ironbreakers go down every 10 steps. This is a skill-based game, and it's really about how well you can play these classes. And the reality is the vast majority of the classes are pretty dang good. And if I were to order this from best to worst, left being the best, right being the worst in each tier, it would look a bit more like this. Between the Witch Hunter Captain, Ironbreaker, and Battle Wizard, it's really hard to say which one is the best, to be honest with you. I think Witch Hunter ultimately takes the cake because he's just good at pretty much everything. He just lacks a little bit of clutch ability, but it's honestly really close between these three. But yeah, that will do it for my Cataclysm quick play tier list. I fully expect people to be arguing about the placements in this tier list. I can already see the comments about the bounty hunter. But come on, let's be real. This is what tier lists are for. Tier lists are really here so we can have arguments about who's better. So if I place your favorite class somewhere you don't think it belongs, leave a comment, let's talk about it. If you're gonna have an argue about anything, it should be about a class in a video game, right? Anyway, as always, I appreciate you guys spending your time watching, listening to me talk about Vermintide. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.